Hello. Okay, it's a good thing that we went through all the hardcore technical things, because I'm normally the one that shows about the future of the internet and spherical music on cube and things kind of things. But I'm rather annoyed with the things that are happening lately, and this is actually a pre-run of a shorter version of one of my talks at Eurodef. So if you didn't get the expensive tickets, lucky you, because you don't have to go. But I normally don't give my talk several times, but I thought this is one that is important for people to understand, that we are at a conjunction when it comes to HTML5, that we actually went through a lot of confusion with HTML5, and now we're at a place where we can really use it and use it for good. And some of the things you may not have looked at, but are sensible for all kind of applications out there. So I'm the principal evangelist for HTML5 and Open Web at Mozilla, and I've been there since the beginning of HTML5. And it was quite interesting to see how the web development sphere out of a sudden said, like, we want to build apps, because we've been doing all these widgets and like frameworks and content management systems that did like tab controls and all these things in a very weird manner. And with HTML5, we said, okay, what do applications need that HTML4 doesn't have for you? And then we actually built a lot of stuff, and we put a lot of stuff in the specifications, and browsers started implementing a lot of things. Some browsers faster than the others, other browsers not at all. And we promised far too much. We said like HTML5 will kill native within like half a year because you can work the same across all platforms, which of course is a very interesting thing to say if you don't control the other platforms or the browsers in those. So you're like, yeah, well, it works in my browser that is not allowed on iOS, and these kind of things. So we thought, okay, what can we use now? And I think it's very important that a lot of people who worked in web development and then got disappointed by HTML5 just never looked at the things properly. We look at them once and try it out when it's too early and it don't work, and then like, bah, never be ready for production, never be able to tell that to my boss. Our clients will never upgrade from their Internet Explorer 5. It's a terrible thing. We cannot do that. We're all doomed. So let's talk about a few things that are in browsers nowadays that you might or might not be aware. If it bores you, I'm sorry about this, but I found a lot of the things are not in use. And I looked at HTTP archive, I look at what people use in the browser, and it's just amazing how many times you see things like this in CSS, for example. People put all kind of handles on their HTML to do some styling. They put like an ID on everything or several classes and a data attribute. That's the cool new thing to use as well. Like every client-side templating engine puts lots of data attributes on there that don't mean much to anybody who just knows HTML. And if we face facts, a lot of times our HTML is not written by people who know HTML or programming. It's done by a content management system, and all we have is paragraph lists and headings. And we don't have these 10,000 classes that we have there. You'll find a lot of frameworks in CSS that have like Twitter icon, big, left, 200 pixels, green background when the moon is full, and these kind of things, that you need all these classes to make it look right. And you can never teach somebody in a content management system to do that, or you shouldn't have to. And that's why we have these selectors that a lot of people don't understand or don't use. We have the P selector for a paragraph. That's simple. But we have, for example, the POOP selector, which is just a class on it. That's another thing that people use as well. Then we have the P hashtag, which is an ID of tag. And then we have a class selector, which in this case is an attribute selector. And that's, for example, I don't see many people use. This means every P that has any class in CSS would get that styling. Any P without a class doesn't get that styling. And you can get wild with this because you actually have a bit of like regular expression type stuff going on there. So you can say, for example, every P with the title hi there should get that kind of styling. And that's when it gets interesting, because you can go with content as well. You can go with attributes. So you can, for example, say if the title starts with HI, then it should be just that styling. If the title ends with HI, then it should be that styling. And this is all possible in CSS across browsers, but most people never used it because this is not an Internet Explorer 6, so probably it's not safe to use. But if you look at what people are using, and it's CSS, so if it doesn't really get applied and the coloring is a bit different, nobody's going to lose their job. Nobody's going to die. As web developers, we're always fascinated when something is 5 pixels off, and then you work with people that work in like Corba or those languages and have like lung machines in hospitals. When they make a coding problem, then people die. In our case, oh, it's a bit off. And most of the time, the clients don't even realize it. And then you have if the title contains an HI in there. So you got all the full handles on that one. And a title, it's not that interesting. But take that, for example, to an href, or take that to a source, and then it becomes more interesting because you could style images from a certain folder different to the images from another folder because that's part of the source. And you can do that in CSS without having to do any other handling. You have then the other ones as well, for example, the PP selector. So that is a P following a P. So you can, for example, do indentation like you do in books. So the first paragraph will be flush aligned, the other ones get an indentation. And you don't need to use a P class first on the first one or P class introduction. You just say P and P plus P and so on and so on and so forth. And you can attach as many as you want to if you want to go deeper in the chain. Any span that is actually a child of the P selector, that means not only a direct child but also further down, would be styled this way. So you can actually have them differently in there. Every div that is following a P, and that is interesting because we don't have a parent selector in CSS, which I always wanted to have. Like style everything that is a P inside that one or inside a div like this, but we don't have that. But this one, a P following a div following a P would be styled this way, and that's pretty powerful as well. A lot of the click selector things, like when people abuse checkboxes in CSS for effects, only works because of this. So there's a great article by Hayden Pickering called Semantic CSS with Intelligent Selectors, where he gets a bit creative with his English and a very poetic in between. But there's lots and lots of good stuff in there, and he's actually followed up with another article lately as well. What he's done a font, Heydings or Hey fonts or something, and he has all these icons in there, which is like Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, Twitter with the old logo, doc, PDF, and so on and so forth. And this is a font that would put these things on links in your document wherever they are. And he does that using these clever selectors. So he does that with like if the href ends with zip or ends with gzip, create a content element, which is the Unicode for the zip folder icon, in front of it. So you don't need to worry about this one going to browsers that don't understand it because they just won't understand it. You don't have to put images inside your text, which means if somebody rewrites the text or changes the URL, that the image is still in there. It automatically realizes that is a zip file, or it finds out it's a PDF, or it finds out it's a Twitter link or a Google link, and it uses those selectors to make that work. And I think it's rather clever because you're independent of the operating system or the content management system and independent of the person writing that website. So and other libraries and other fonts would do it like, okay, you have a target blank, class, new window icon, Twitter icon. Again, in a content management system, that would be hard to put in there. But with this font and that way of doing it, all you have to do is href Twitter and target blank. And he uses those selectors if the target contains blank, if the href contains Twitter, to put the different icons in there automatically. And I think that's a very simple way of using that and a very clever way of using CSS. This you see a lot as well in frameworks. So you see Lee class, list item first, list item, list item, list item, list item, list item last. But that's actually already implied in your HTML. This is the first one, this is the last one. The others are list items because they say li here. That's why it's the Unicode of poop up there as the explanation of what that is. We all know these because we put them on links. When CSS came out, we removed the underscore, and when you moved the mouse over it, we showed the underscore again. And then we did that for 16 minutes because it was the most awesome thing that browsers can do. I once won a pitch showing that to people, explaining that my company knows CSS and the other ones don't. But we don't know the others, where we have like first child, nth last child, nth of type, and so on and so forth. And the interesting one of empty, target, checked, enabled, disabled, and not. Not is an interesting one because that's a classic case of CSS logic where like don't do this when it's not that. The same as like exclamation mark important to me as a JavaScript developer means it's not important, but in CSS it is important. So it's quite interesting to jump between these languages. The empty one is really cool for tables, for example. If you just want to show a red table cell when something's missing, just use an empty selector. You don't have to do class red on that thing. What can you do with that? So you say, for example, UL first child is the first one here. UL last child is the last one here. UL nth child odd is every odd one. Nth child even is every even one. nth child 3n is every third one, nth child 3n plus 1 is every third plus 1, or 4n, really. Or you can do minus 1 as well. So you can do that to style every single thing in that list without having to write any single class inside it, if you just know your CSS, and that is supported well across different browsers. And the support is actually epic, because every browser supports it nowadays. And that goes back to even the ones that are icky now, like Chrome 31 or iOS 7.1. Even Opera Mini supports this, and Opera Mini is not even a browser but a service. It's basically just streaming an HTML thing down to your page and giving you the CSS for it as well. Hayden Pickering again gave a great talk on effortless style where he explained all this, and he explained the lobotomized owl selector, which is a very interesting selector and a very strange name, but he's English. And an article on Listapart as well. So these slides will be available later on the links as well, so you don't need to write them down now. DOM manipulation is another big thing. Everybody uses jQuery to actually reach that one ID in the page, because obviously that's not possible in every browser. Nowadays in browsers, we have two things called Query Selector and Query Selector All, and that is exactly all that you need to access everything in the document. It does the same as the Sizzle engine inside jQuery does, so you can select by hash, by class, by everything as a CSS selector is, you can access things in the page. And again, the browser support, Internet Explorer 8 is the only turd in the punch bowl here, everything else is totally fine. And it's in there. Of course, Query Selector All is a bit longer than a $sign. But you don't need to include that jQuery. That on your desktop doesn't hurt anybody. On a mobile phone in Bangladesh and India means people will not be able to use your site because it takes them 3 weeks to download it. So the less you can put in your pages, the better actually for the end user. So don't worry about these things. Class list, add, remove, toggle contains. Like add a class, remove a class, toggle a class, contain a class. This was always my interview question of somebody asking me. I asked people to write me that function, to do that with every class in a document. And this is now in the browser. So when I did that last time, somebody just said like document class list. And I'm like, okay, you're clever, but I still want to know what that function's under the hood, but fair enough. This is supported by IE 10 and onwards, and not by Opera Mini, strangely enough, and not by the Android browser 2.3. But every other browser, fair enough, go for it. This annoyed me that 8 and 9 didn't do it. So there's a polyfill for it, but Action 10 and 11 now has it, because it's super useful. Because in essence, what I use JavaScript most of the time, now that I actually embrace CSS much more, I just add classes and remove classes from things and let the rest do the CSS. Because then the visual designer, the CSS person can go wild. And I'm the one who doesn't know about fonts and padding and margins. I don't want to mess with those things. I want to have somebody who loves doing that stuff do that stuff. So data sets are interesting. Data sound, moo of cow here, and then you do p dataset sound equals moo. In browsers that don't support it, you just go do a get attribute data dash sound. The good thing about dataset is that it's actually pre-cached, so it's not an access to the DOM every single time that it is with get attribute, because it doesn't try to do the live node. It just gets the node directly from the browser. And that one is nicely supported in all but Opera Mini again. And strangely enough, only by IE 11 so far. But again, if you do get attribute, it works as well. This is interesting though, because both JavaScript and CSS know them. As we saw earlier, you can do an attribute selector, and the attribute selectors totally work on data attributes, because it's just another attribute. So what you can do with this, so that I don't just talk about Hayden, but I actually write things as well, in 2012, you can have, for example, in a DOM game, an ID of data player with a data named Joe and a data score of 100. If you don't want to go through Canvas, but you want to do your games in the DOM for some reason. And then you can do query selector data player with the ID on it, and you can say player dataset score, player dataset name, and you can set the score and you can read it out again. So this one allows you to, in your HTML, to make it editable very, very simply for people as well. But it also means you can style it. So if you take the same construct and you do a data player data score 10, then you give it a red color because it actually is down to 10. Otherwise, it would be a black color or a gray color. So you can do the scoring inside your CSS. And this is what it would look like. You can even display them with an after or a before selector, a generated content. The content is the attribute data name, the position is -50, and the position is 100 pixels. And this is what it would look like. In this case, as the score is 10, it becomes red, otherwise it would turn gray. So you don't even have to do a add class to this when it's less than 10 points. You can do that in CSS directly, and that means the browser does it for you as well in the pre-rendering. It doesn't mean you have to do it in your loop. Media queries are interesting as well. They are the ones that allow you to write one layout and basically show it differently according to what you do. Landscape, portrait, 400 pixels, 600 pixels. You resize your fonts and you resize and shift your things around according to what the device does. And this is really, really powerful, but also can be quite daunting the first time you look at it. But it's a very interesting way of dealing with the problem of different screen sizes, because there's just no way to tell the user, please upgrade your phone to 1920 pixels to see my stuff. That's not going to happen. We don't have rollout phones yet. It's going to come probably soon. And the support of that one is epic as well. Again, Internet Explorer 9 is the first one. Other than that, we got it. And this one is something that is especially nicely supported on mobile, which is something that is very seldom that happens. But the good thing about media queries is also that no support to me is always an opportunity. People always whine when browsers don't do things. I like when they reliably don't do things. You know, when something says no all the time, then I know I can do something. The same way a compass that always points south is also useful. Just go in the other direction. And if you do this, media all and min width 0 or media only, around your whole CSS block, Internet Explorer 8 and 9 will never get it. And that's pretty cool. That actually means you can filter out an older browser without having to do any sniffing or finding out what the browser is. You just know that browser can't do that, so put that around your CSS and you're fine. The same way you can put a if document, I don't know, get query selector, or even a document add event listener around your JavaScript, then Internet Explorers never will get it, old ones. And that's good. Don't write code for those old browsers, because people using them are unhappy anyways. They don't want to have beautiful things. They just want to do the things that they have to use every day anyways. Conditional loading resource on media queries is an interesting one, because the problem with media queries is that a lot of people put like everything in media queries and all the different images for that one as well. And then the strange thing that browsers do is actually they load everything. So if I say, if a link route style sheet and it's for 600 pixel minimum or 4000 pixel minimum, which is probably not loaded many times, they still get loaded. And that's because the pre-processing of CSS in the browser. The browser loads the CSS, renders the DOM, does things with it. It needs to know the CSS first. So if you take developer tools in any browser, you will see that all of them get loaded. And that's terrible, because it means that all the images in there get loaded as well. And that's how you get these fun websites like LG Watch. Did you see that one? 53 meg on the first load. And it's just really, and we complain about Flash sites being slow. This is just amazing. So I was looking at that and I'm like, what can we do? This is awful. Well, the good thing is CSS has a JavaScript brother called Match Media. So I can say window match media, screen and min width 600 pixels, then write out a style sheet and load the style sheet only when it's necessary, which is dirty, but it works. And it works in older browsers as well, because the match media never gets supported. Support, Internet Explorer has a problem with 8 and 9, and Opera Mini, of course, doesn't do anything creative. And then I've got document write is just evil, and with a CSP, for example, you could never use document write, so it's not a good idea to do it. So I went back to the data attributes. So in this case, I do a data media, a data href, and a class of media query dependent, which is a very long class name. We could do a different one if you wanted to. And then I just write a loop in JavaScript that goes through all the link elements that I have. And also, that makes that functionality possible for every element, not only for link elements. Because images, for example, don't have a media query selector, much like videos have, the picture element has, but image itself doesn't have. So now I have a data or data source, a data media screen. So what I do in my loop, just loading on the page is finished, I look for every element called with a class called media query dependent. And then I loop over them with a while or minus minus. That's a bit weird, but that's the way I like my loops. And I check if it has a media data set, and if the match media of the window right now matches the media that it has. If it has, I go through all the other attributes and remove the data dash and set the attribute accordingly. So if we go back to that one, that would turn that into source kitten, alt kitten, source place kitten, and data media will be skipped because I check for that one as well. So that would only load that image when the media query gets actually activated rather than loading it all the time. And that can be tested. And JavaScript, of course, is evil and kills kittens, so you can always do a fallback as well. If you just put the href standard CSS, that will always be loaded. And if that media query gets applied, the green CSS will be loaded on top of the standard.css, which is something to think about in your applications. We do a lot of preloading and we do a lot of bootstrapping, but we don't actually look at our media queries enough, and it's not a good idea. Video is an interesting one. When video came out, we're always super excited. Like, finally, video element is not that weird flash thing that we have to copy and paste because we don't understand what the thing does anyways. We had out of a sudden a video element in there that we can rotate and we can do overlay. Remember when how hard it was to put like a text on top of a video when it was a flash video in Internet Explorer 6? You had to do that iframe hack thing. It was just awful. And now, yeah, it's a video element. Just put another div with another set index on top of it and you're done. So fallbacks are good. I like fallbacks. I'm a big accessibility guy. So when an image cannot be loaded or an image is not available, then it sells me cute kitten photo and I'm still happy because it's a cute kitten photo. And in my head, I can see a cute kitten. I don't have to see the picture. With a video, not so much. But in images, it's even better because I get an error handler on the image as well. So I know if an error has been called and the natural width and the natural height of the image is 0, then the image was not loaded. It was not that the image didn't get rendered or something like that, it just was not there. That's also a good way to test if people have an ad blocker or not. With video, it's a different story. In video, I have my controls here, and I have a source or dynamic search MP4, and it's an MP4, which means it's a codec that's not open source, so some browsers will not be able to show it. That's okay. I can put a fallback in there of an image showing one picture of the video and pointing to the video and click it to actually do it. Everybody has a video player on their operating system. Why not allow them to just click and watch it in VLC or QuickTime or whatever they do? Would be nice, but the problem is if the browser supports video element, which every browser does now, but it doesn't support video MP4, I get a gray box. I don't get the fallback content. So it feels like, yeah, video is there and we can do cool things with it and we're almost there and it's fun to do, and we just never reach it. It's just not the thing that we can do. So, yeah, okay, no, can we get it this time? No. And that's what I feel with video and fallback. It's like because MP4s are not free. So here's the interesting thing. Of course, you would expect the error handler to be fired on the video element when the video cannot be rendered, right? No, not when you read the specifications. The error handler gets fired on the last source element inside the video element. So you actually get the video element, you then get all the source elements, you loop through them, or you get the last one, and then you do an add event listener error on the last source element, and then you take the inner HTML of the video and replace the video with the inner HTML. That's how simple it is to have a fallback in video. It gets even better when you actually try to test for codecs because there's a can play type on a video element. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. So can play type MP4, can you play MP4s? And then I give it the MP4 video. And according to the specification, it should rename an empty string if the type is a type that the user agent knows but cannot render, or it's octet stream, or it returns probably, or it returns maybe. So somebody specified an API and implemented an API in every browser that says maybe, probably, or empty string. That's why we need developers to tell people in the specification groups to what they should be doing, because this is pointless. I don't want to have an app like, yeah, maybe. You know, like, no, tell me if you can or cannot do it. And it's Apple's fault. Canvas is a cool thing. A lot of people see Canvas as something that you can paint with, and it is. It's a canvas. It's actually an API that actually allows you to draw inside the browser. It's also an empty element that has no fallback, which is quite funny, because that's when the purists of HTML got a bit like, well, you put an element in there that only makes sense with JavaScript. Yeah, deal with it. So a lot of people use Canvas for gaming. There's Phaser.io, and there's other libraries like Pixie.js, which allows you to do WebGL rendering, and if WebGL is not supported, it actually does it with Canvas. But I find it actually more interesting because it's a very simple painting API. This is a HubGrabbit.io browser. This is basically Illustrator in the browser using Canvas. Written in the browser, working across all the browsers right now, which is pretty nuts. To me, it's not a very basic painting API because the API of Canvas is kind of weird. You have things like begin path and close path and not end path. You know, it's like that PHP type of naming things. We just randomly put things together and hope people read the documentation rather than like having something really understand Arc2 and Arc. So when you talk to Flash developers and they look at that, they're all like, yeah, well, this is your API, really? And you want to kill Flash with that? Well, we did. To me, though, it's actually a collection of pixels. That's the really cool thing. In Canvas, I can reach every pixel on the canvas or every pixel in an image that goes on the canvas. So that's pretty cool. I built, for example, a thing called Zoom and Pick that allows you to pick colors from an image. And this is directly working in the browser. If you want to try that out, you can actually hit the escape button here and you can see Zoom and Pick. So I can take any picture that might be embarrassing or not. Let's see what we have. Cartoons. That cannot be wrong. So let's drop that here. And then I got the image here and I can select the colors and I can collect my colors and they're stored in local storage. So if you have clients that have a logo and they want to have directly their color, you can tell them on upload to actually pick the heading with the color as well. That could be done in any content management system very, very easily because it's also open source. Steal this stuff, use it. And then it generates a CSS at the end that you can use directly in there as well. And when you put that together with File Reader, then it becomes really interesting because you get full access to the image data or whatever file you put into your browser. You get binary access to data files. And this is pretty awesome what you can do with this. I've been at TEDx Linz in Austria the other day, and I gave a talk about put social back in social media. One of the things I explain to people is that if you upload pictures of yourself without many clothes, that's your thing. If you upload them from your phone, you probably gave away your address as well, which people didn't realize because the EXIF data has the location in it and everything in there. So people are, oh, what do I do now? So there's a cool command line tool called EXIF tool that allows you to alter the EXIF data of every JPEG and also rewrite it. But it was too hard for people to use. So I wrote this thing here called removephotodata.com, which works offline and is using an app cache as well. So what that one does is I have, for example, this picture of Willy the Wombat here. And then I used a JavaScript library called exif.js to get the exif data out. And if you read this, then you realize that he lives in Australia and everywhere and all kind of data in there as well. I didn't want him to be found, so I wanted to find a way to do that. All I had to do was take the image, put it on a canvas, and read out the pixel array of the canvas. So you say query selector canvas, get the context to the set the width and height of the canvas to the natural height and natural width of the image because that's a nature image. And then you can draw the image to the width and height and 0, 0. And all I had to do to make it a downloadable without the EXIF data is just a C to data URL, image JPEG 0.9 that turns that pixel array into a JPEG with 0.9, 90% quality. And a download attribute on the link itself means if you click on it with a name, the browser downloads it for you. That's how much it took. And poof, the EXIF data is gone. And we don't know where Willy the Wombat lives any longer, which is good because he's safe now. You can take a look at that in the browser as well if you wanted to. And this is something I think I'm trying to get into the gallery of Firefox OS that automatically tells you, like, do you really want to share this information? Your home location is in that photo and these kind of things. So remove personal data from photos. So for example, a photo that I shot here earlier. Oh, not that I shot that in England. But if you upload that one to the thing here, it shows you that it was taken with my Nexus 5, and it shows you that it was actually in London somewhere. The GPS info data is in there as well. And then I already click the download clean one here, then it just downloads it to my hard drive, and I don't have to, I see the same picture, all the data is there, but the EXIF information, the data that I didn't want to give away, has been removed from it directly in the browser, offline in your computer, which I thought was pretty amazing that you can do that nowadays. And especially that download attribute, I don't see people using much, which is sad because it's amazing. File Reader API support is good. File API support is good. Download attribute support is not good, which is sad because it's so useful and so simple. But you can still do an on-click handler on it and just send an octet stream header and force the browser that way to download it, much like we did in PHP. There's also a filesaver.js, which has all kind of polyfills in there to make it work for all the browsers that don't do it. The last thing I did with this is also go further and use JS-zip, which allows you to generate generate script files in JavaScript. So instead of just having one image that I turn into something or pick pixels from it, I now allow you to actually make thumbnails. So I can define the options of my thumbnail. So I say like 250 pixels, for example, and 250 pixels. I want the quality not be the full quality, but lesser, and then it becomes more pixely. And I want to set it on a background color and have the background color in there as well. And these are all just HTML controls. This is a color picker, this is a range control, these are number controls. So on a phone, they would turn into something more useful. Once I set these kind of things, I now say create thumbnails, and then I can take a lot of images, drag them in here, and create a thumbnail, and I have a zip file now of all the thumbnails that I wanted to have here. I can also preview them and download them bit by bit, and then we're fine. So you can see the different thumbnails, you can see the different sizes, and all works directly in the browser as well. So I can not only resize images, but I can create zip files. And how cool would that be, for example, for a content management system? You know these product managers that love to send you 12,000 Word documents with one logo in each of them, so you can copy and paste it out into your JPEG editor? You can now actually allow them to pick 10 Word documents, zip them up, and only upload 50K to your server rather than 12 meg and each of those files, and unzip them directly on the server. And they don't even need to know. It all happens on their computer. And I think it's quite amazing what you can do with browsers nowadays if you just trust them. Oh, that's a screencast. So, oops. And that's what I wanted to show you. So you're it. Go look at caniuse.com. This is where all the charts came from. That shows you all the cool stuff that browsers can do nowadays. Go to developer tools, analyze what other people have been doing, because nothing is hidden on the web. So if you see something that you like, it's really easy to reverse engineer what people have been doing. This is in the Spotify office here, and I always like that. Like, think it, build it, ship it, tweak it. As developers, we're very depressed a lot of times that we cannot do what we want to do. That's why I build things like these image pickers and stuff for myself, and then I show it to people in the company. They're like, "Oh, cool! You can use that in the same thing now." So find your happiness by just building something, putting it out, and sharing it with others and tweaking it. And we got these wonderful tools nowadays. We got GitHub, we got JS Fiddle, we got JS Bin, we've got CodePen, all these things out there. Instead of having to explain to each other how our code works, we can just share the code and have live conversations over it. In JS Fiddle, you have, for example, a collaborate button that gives you a chat client or even an audio chat client and two different cursors, so you can code together. I do that in job interviews as well, because then you can't cheat because I see what you're doing. And you cannot just copy and paste it from somewhere else in there. And I'm like, oh, you just wrote 900 lines in 12 seconds. Not bad. So share your stuff and play with people, and before you know it, you have people that you work with, and it's much easier to hire them once you've seen their code as well. And that's all I had for today. So thank you.